A man dies from dozens of stab wounds. His roommate is now behind bars accused of the crime. Welcome back to Sidebar here on Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy. The coroner in Boulder, Colorado, says Kurt Smolker died last Tuesday after suffering dozens of stab wounds in his head, neck, and abdomen. Smolker's roommate, Garrett Littenberg, is being held on a $10 million bond on a first-degree murder charge. The prosecutor said in court that Smolker called Littenberg's family just after 10 last Tuesday night and said Littenberg wasn't acting right. Then the family member heard muffled noises. The family member also told police that Littenberg was, quote, screaming, talking about Putin, rape, and complete gibberish. An affidavit said Littenberg told the family member when asked where Smolker was, "Don't worry about him. He's dead. I killed him." With me to discuss this case is Bobby Chacon. He's a retired FBI agent and lawyer, also a screenwriter out there in California. Bobby, welcome back to Sidebar.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
This is a really disturbing case. It doesn't sound like this is really a whodunit. It kind of seems more like a why did he do it? Because this man, according to the court documents, is admitting to killing his roommate, Kurt Smolker. And it sounds like he has some serious mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to call this a simple case, but I mean, from a law enforcement investigator standpoint, I mean, you get a 911 call, you arrive, you hear shouting, the door is open, you see footprints leading upstairs, you go upstairs and there's somebody yelling to the police that he's going to come out with his hands up. He does that and his arms are covered in blood. They take him into custody, look around, they find a victim in one of the rooms in a large pool of the victim's own blood, obviously stabbed multiple times, deceased. You have now, you do a little further investigation. You have the alleged perpetrator on the phone with a family member, I think a sister maybe even, while he's in the act of killing this person, his roommate. And he's shouting and he is on mental health medication, I believe. He suffers from some psychosis and anxiety. And so he's on some medication, whether he was on the medication at that point or not. Oftentimes when they stop taking their medication, these psychotic breaks happen. But yeah, it sounds like there was some erratic behavior on the phone with a family member who is basically a witness, even though they're not at the scene watching it. They're somewhere else, but they're live listening to it. And they're listening to his erratic behavior. He's screaming things about Putin, Vladimir Putin, and rape and other things, irrational things. And then he actually says, "Don't worry about him. I killed him. He's dead." So he has an admission, a confession to one of his family members on the phone. And so in that way, it's kind of a simple case. But like you said, why? The why of it is, look, we can't sometimes make, rational judgments about irrational behavior. This is a psychotic break. Whatever happened inside his mind, which is damaged, and was getting help for, went wrong at that particular point in time. Whether or not him and the roommate were engaged in a conversation, an argument, a topic of that upset him or not, we'll never know. But does it matter? I mean, there's nothing that they could have been arguing about or talking about that would justify these actions. So I often point to when people are constantly trying to know the why of it. I'm like, first of all, why? The why of it is often not required for a statute for murder. As long as you have the evidence that the person did commit the murder and there wasn't a self-defense angle to it or anything like that. The why is kind of secondary to me as an investigator. As long as I have enough evidence to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that you did this crime, then I'm done. My job is finished. The why of it in a case like this where, he's not a serial killer, he's not going to, he's not on the loose, is secondary. As long as we have enough evidence to convict him, he's probably going to spend, I think he even mentioned to the sister on the phone, "I killed him, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail." And hopefully that is the case, because clearly he was under the care of a physician who was prescribing him medication. But both that physician's care and the medication weren't enough. So maybe he has to be institutionalized for the rest of his life.
Or maybe he wasn't on his meds. We see this a lot of times, that people who are prescribed psychiatric medication sometimes go off their meds. And we have Kurt Smolker, this poor man, this victim here, stabbed dozens of times, according to the prosecutor, in his head, neck, and abdomen. massive pool of blood, several knives, a flannel shirt wrapped around his head when police get there. So I think this is potentially a real possibility, or mixing possibly other drugs. And we don't know that, but I'm just saying that's a possibility with Littenberg here.
Yeah. And the problem with antipsychotic drugs, number one, is the side effects. And number two is that, when you let people out, you have to rely on their own reliability to take them. We can't force people to take them if they're not institutionalized. So when they're out there living among us, they can simply decide, or situations can occur where they don't take their medicine. Either they run out, they can't get new medicine, or the medicine needs adjusting, or for some reason they simply start using alcohol or other drugs and they stop taking the antipsychotic medicine because they don't like the way it makes them feel. And then you have their psychoses, or whatever the underlying condition is, rise to the surface again, and it could result in a tragic circumstance like this. So the problem is, you can't, no matter how much you try, you can't force people to take medication if they're not under, an institutional situation, if they're under the care of a doctor in an institution. When they're out in the street, they can simply decide not to. And we've often seen that.
One of the saddest things about this too is the fact that, you're a roommate with somebody. Sometimes you might not look like your roommates, but these two may have been friends. And Kurt Smolker is calling the family member and saying, look, he's not right. Something is wrong here. I think that's another interesting point you brought up, that we have an ear witness. There are eyewitnesses and there are ear witnesses. So we have her on the phone, as you said, listening to all of this go down.
Yeah, and that's another thing we often see in these cases. We see friends, family members, people who are close to the person saying they're not right. Either their medication is not working anymore because the dosage needs to be readjusted, or they're not taking it for whatever reason. And so, when people have the deeper issues, the deeper problems that require the more medication, the more you notice it when they stop taking their medication. And those are the people that, tend to be the more violent ones, the ones with the deeper rooted problems. And they become much more obvious when they stop taking their meds. And then, unfortunately, sometimes tragedy ensues, like we have in this case.
Most definitely. Well, we will see where this case goes. This may be some type of case where there's a mental health resolution to this, rather than a prison type resolution to this. But we just don't know. I mean, I think we're still in the early stages of this and need to hear about more facts.
Yeah, I think we're going to hear more from the family members, more from friends. They were roommates. They probably did have social acquaintances who would come over to that house, and they can shed some light on the situation and the relationship between these two and things like that. Again, none of that is going to justify or defend this individual who's accused of this horrific crime. But it may shed some light on, what was happening inside that house or that home in the days and possibly weeks leading up to, this horrific tragedy.
Yeah, and it is horrific. Poor Kurt Smolker. It's just awful. Our thoughts go out to his family. Bobby Chacon, thank you as always for coming back on. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me anytime.
That's it for this edition of Law and Crime's Sidebar Podcast. You can listen to and download Sidebar on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always watch it on Law and Crime's YouTube channel. Remember to hit the subscribe button. I'm Anjanette Levy, and we will see you next time.